Happy New Year, everyone. It's really nice to see you all in 2024. I guess I accidentally put 2023 here. It's 2024, first call of the year, and we're really excited to share with you what we have been working on. So for newcomers, what is this community call for? It's for you, not for us. We take this time to share updates on topics that we wouldn't cover in our own calls and content. So this is your chance to be super active in the Q&A because our whole team is here pretty much. And we want to talk to you directly, speak to you about all of the things that we are working on, and we want to answer you directly. It's a more casual connection, so it won't always have super new, exciting announcements or feature reveals, but we do have exciting demos every month, I would like to say. Please use the chat. We will be monitoring and answering questions as they come up. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. At the end, we also have question and answer, so you could wait till the end as well. But if you have a question in the moment, just raise your hand. We can answer you directly, and you can unmute your mic. Okay, let's get started. So our release 0.25, we're trying to release it this week. Hopefully it will be released this week, if not at the beginning of next week. Compile time imports is now GA'd in this release, and we're super excited about that. There's been some bugs there, which I'll talk about in a bit, but we've been fully fixing those, and so it should be not experimental anymore, hopefully. Another experimental feature, the F12 published source module. One of our engineers, Stephen Weatherford, has been working on this, and he will demo this in a little bit. And so this is really exciting. I know some people know about this, some people don't, but this is a really cool feature. Support load content functions and UDFs. So the user-defined functions load functions such as load text content and load JSON content, etc., are now supported in user-defined functions. They can now work successfully, which is pretty good. Another experimental feature, the JSON RPC, I had written this wrong, I'm sorry, RPC command, which is currently allows you to run the Bicep CLI in the JSON RPC server mode. You can find more information on usage under the docs for experimental features in GitHub. We're still working on this, but there's been some changes in the past couple months, so pretty exciting. We've implemented use of type properties as type expressions. So elements or properties of types can be used as standalone type expressions. This is compatible with both resource-derived types and compile time imports. Additionally, with this implementation comes support for resource types for parameter validation. Johnny will present this after a couple slides, and he'll share what this is. There have been some bug fixes as well, including one regarding validation failure when using compile time imports with user-defined types and user-defined functions. We have fixed that, thank God. Now you guys can use that together. So yeah, those are some exciting features and bug fixes in this release. So for our future releases, 0.26, modular parameters have been pushed back again, unfortunately, but we're just trying to get this design perfect so that works for everyone and there won't be too many issues or, yeah, not too many differences in the actual code base. Resource utility type, so type of function, we are working on that. Hopefully it could be released next month, if not the month after. When our engineer Johnny has been working on that. And dynamic type updates, Ari, our engineer, has been working on this. It's taking a little time. Hopefully it could be released next month, if not the month after. It's taking, it's a bit of work, it's complicated, but it's really great work that he's been doing. 0.27 to be determined. Things keep getting moved back and moved up. So really stay tuned next month and we'll share what will be released soon. Okay, resource type parameters. Johnny, if you want to share your screen. Hopefully he's here today.
Yes, I am here. I'm just
okay, great.
Trying to make sure everything's not too big.
Okay.
Sorry, that's a All right. Am I sharing VS Code with everyone?
Yes, I think it might be a little small. If you want to make it slightly bigger, would be great. I think that's good.
Okay. So two things that are coming out for type enhancements, one GA, one experimental, are being able to use a piece of a type, like just a portion of it as a standalone type, and also something that we're calling like resource derived types. Um, so resource derived types, because it's experimental, you have to turn on this feature flag. And this will be available in the next release. So just to take a look at the resource derived type pretty quickly, here we have a type that we're calling a storage account, and we're saying this matches a known resource, the Microsoft.storage/storage accounts resource at this particular API version. What that means is like if you use this as a parameter type or an output type, uh, you'll get warnings in Bicep if anything doesn't match the resource body type that we know about. The reason it's a warning rather than a hard fail, like you would see for a full user-defined type, is we know that provider supplied types can sometimes be inaccurate and they can sometimes like not be fully up to date if you're using a 2-week old version of Bicep and the resource provider has pushed an update to their. So anyway, we have this one file, two exported types, a storage account, this resource derived type, and just an object. So if we go into main.bicep, we can import these types, types.bicep, and let's see. Okay, this didn't have it a second ago. Yeah, that's an experimental feature, so the demo gods have not been kind to me. Anyway, so if we want to use a piece of that object type that we define in the other file as a parameter type, say param foo, an object, and then we'll know that param foo matches an object totally. But we can start to descend into that if we're only interested in part of it. And you can descend into properties just with the dot operator. The property itself is a tuple type. So like, let's say here, we don't actually want this tuple. We just want what's at the first position. And there we're looking at a dictionary. And what if we only want the value? Here we have an array of strings. And if we only wanted the element type of an array, you can do that as well. So these can be stacked and combined however you need to get to any arbitrary place within a type. Okay, so what I had been planning on demoing was something similar for these resource-derived types. There's clearly a bit of an issue to work out with exporting like a full resource-derived type there. So I'll have that addressed. But here, if you use this descent before exporting, you can see that because this is the name of a storage account, we know that it has to be between 3 and 24 characters. And if Microsoft Storage were to change that at any point, you wouldn't need to update your templates because we're just using the schema that's been supplied by that resource provider. Okay. One other thing that I just wanted to share quickly with the compile time imports that I thought was pretty cool was one thing I've seen come up a couple of times is what I call the deadly diamond of doom. So if you've ever used like a utility module to do some kind of like string transformation or something, you can end up in a situation that is not ideal. So setting the stage here, we have two modules in our main.bicep file, and they're both pointing at the same the same file. We've given them different names, so we have mod1 and mod2, and they have different parameters. Then if we take a look at the contents of mod.bicep, which is being used for both of these modules, um, it is in turn going to an inner module. So we have our in parameter, and then we're creating a module inner with the name inner, and then passing the parameter into it. Um, and then when we go to inner, that is just echoing back the in parameter. As this out parameter, we're doing something similar in mod.bicep. We are taking the out parameter from inner.bicep, making that our out parameter. And then in main.bicep, we want two outputs, one named 1, one named 2, and they're supposed to correspond to the out parameter from mod1 and mod2. So, quick quiz. What do you think the result of deploying this is? Give you 5 options. Uh, the obvious one, where 1 is the string 1, 2 is the string 2, is almost never the case. So that's one option. It could also be a 409 error, because we have a conflict, or you can end up with just one nested deployment and the same value returned back for both. So we would have an output of 1 with a value of 1 and an output of 2 with the value of 1. Or conversely, the output for both might be 2. Okay, so we're not actually running this like a quiz, I guess, but the answer is E, one of the above, probably one of C or D, but it's non-deterministic. And this is because of the fact that we're creating two nested deployment resources with the same name. That's a named resource, so they don't combine in necessarily the way you would expect. But you can avoid this situation really easily by using user-defined functions and compile time imports. So this would be in place of utility modules. We've just updated mod.bicep here to, instead of calling into a utility module that's doing something with the string, we're importing functions from a shared file and then calling those functions. Here, the answer is always A. It's what you would have thought it would be, and it is completely deterministic. So I thought that was pretty cool, and I'm glad to see that hit GA. Okay, and I can hand it back to Stephanie.
Thanks, Johnny. Looks like a lot of people are excited about this, and I'm excited as well. All right, our next topic is the F12 for source module. Stephen, hopefully you're here. Do you want to share your screen?
Sure. Okay, you should be able to see my screen. So, as mentioned, I've been working on having the ability to view sources of Bicep files. We've had this for a while under an experimental flag. It still will be under the experimental flag with the next release for publishing. It'll no longer be required to have the experimental flag on for viewing. And we are planning on starting to publish the Bicep registry modules and AVM modules with this option. We'll roll that out slowly, make sure there aren't any issues. I've been having a little trouble actually connecting this morning, maybe because I realized that I hadn't updated the CLI yet. So this is what this should look like. We've got this now hooked into both the AZ CLI and PowerShell. So you can say AZ Bicep publish, give it a file name, give it the target, including a version number, and -- with source. We'll do that. And I don't think it's going to, that one is new. Yeah, we have lots of fun with demos. At any rate, I'm not going to worry about that. That would publish the module if it weren't since the last 10 minutes. And out of the oven, I am going to pull a nice new warm module here. This is one of the AVM modules that I've published privately. See, we got a reference here. If I press F12 on this, then I'm taken to the JSON as usual. But now we also have an experimental option at the top to see the Bicep source. So here is the Bicep source as it was published. You can go back to the JSON if you'd like. When the experimental flag is removed, then it'll go straight to the Bicep. You can also, any submodules that are in there, you can also view.
Sorry, Stephen, can you zoom in quickly?
Sure.
Great, thank you.
I can remember how to. There we go. Is that better?
I think so. Iqbal, I think it looks good.
Yeah, a little more just for the sake of it. Right, so this was one of the submodules that was included in it. You maybe you couldn't read this before. It says show the compiled JSON for the module, so you can go back to that. What we haven't done yet is nested modules here. We will show the JSON and not yet the Bicep, but we plan on introducing that soon as well. Any questions? None that I can see. Okay, so that's it then.
Great. Thanks for the quick demo. If there are any questions, please put them in chat and we can, and we can respond to them in the chat. All right, our next topic, Dan, Microsoft Graph Bicep extension private preview. We're sharing the feedback that we got and the updates that we have. Dan, did you want to share or did you want me to scroll through for you?
I just requested to take control, so hopefully that's going to work.
Unfortunately, no, because I'm sharing this in a window.
Oh. Okay, I can get you to go through the slides.
Okay,
thanks, Stephanie. Howdy, folks. It's great to be back and have an opportunity to talk to this community again. I think we were last here in July. And since then, we've released the private preview. Apologies to folks who have tried to join the private preview and have been unable to. We had a lot of people requesting to join, and we tried to add folks more or less on a first come, first served basis with our kind of like limited capacity for the private preview. So again, apologies on that. I'm sure there'll be more folks who want to join, and we'll see what we can do. Maybe we can open it up again in the next couple of months. But anyway, since we've been running the private preview, for the folks who have been in there, thank you very much for trying it out and giving us feedback. And we'd like to take you through some of that feedback and then open up a quick poll to everyone here and then give you some updates around our plans. Stephanie, can you move forward, please? And again. So yeah, I think our main takeaway here is for folks who tried it out, I feel like they liked what they saw in terms of promise, and that they would move forward with the feature if it's ready for production deployment. I think we had a little work to do in terms of how easy and intuitive the graph bicep types are. I'm not sure if that partly was due to some folks who maybe weren't as familiar with Bicep, and maybe our documentation wasn't as clear as it should have been, which leads to the next slide. So I think we got strong feedback that the documentation was lacking. I think we didn't have links off to existing Bicep documentation for folks who were new to Bicep and needed to learn about Bicep, but also we didn't really have any Bicep type references. Our assumption was that it kind of closely mirrored the REST APIs, and folks would just go to the Microsoft Graph REST API documentation. But I'm now investigating how we can generate some graph bicep type references similar to the ones that I guess folks are familiar with in the templates documentation in our Learn sections. I think another strong piece of feedback we got was that we only, for our application type or application resource, we only support certificates as the credential, and that's extremely difficult to configure and manage. And there were a lot of folks asking for secrets and password support, and I'll have more on that later. We had some confusion around being able to reference existing resources in terms of a little bit of our naming. We try to keep consistent naming that we see in ARM templates, where the client provided key is called name, but that then caused confusion because in the Microsoft Graph API, that same property was actually called unique name in places, and there was already a display name property. So folks were getting confused. So we're trying to address that as well. And the last two really we saw were around when folks had problems, it was difficult to debug, and that what if wasn't working. We can move to the next slide, Stephanie. In terms of the feedback we got either through our survey or through issues that were raised, we had a series of resources that folks were commonly asking for, but we also saw broader requests around, well, just give me everything for identity and access management, and the full suite of Entra APIs exposed as Bicep types as an alternative to PowerShell CLI and REST APIs. And even further than that, someone was asking to see Microsoft 365 supported here, so primarily Teams and SharePoint APIs. On the feature ask side, zero-touch deployments or app-only support was easily the number one. Supporting application credentials simpler than certificates, again, very important. And no surprises around what if and verbose, as well as easy cleanup mechanisms. An interesting one was that someone was asking around being able to deploy graph resources without an Azure subscription, and I'd definitely be interested if other folks on this in this community call would be interested in that, where maybe they're only deploying Entra or Graph resources and they don't necessarily have a dependency on Azure. Next slide, please, Stephanie. So what I'm going to do here is I'm basically going to start a quick poll. The poll is in a Microsoft form survey. So if I've pasted the link in the chat window, before you start on answering questions on the poll, and please, if you can answer the questions, that would be great. I have some context on each of the questions. So if you can wait to answer the questions until you've seen the context, that would be great. So Stephanie, can you move forwards, please? So first one's pretty self-explanatory. So if you can just answer whether you are or not an existing customer of the private preview, that would be great. Stephanie, if you can move forwards. Okay. One of the challenges that we discovered during the private preview is that with interactive flows where there's a signed-in user, a client app that is granted user impersonation permission to ARM can basically deploy any Entra resources. So really, we internally were viewing this as a backdoor to Microsoft Graph, which clearly is not a good thing. So from our point of view, ideally a client really needs to be granted the permissions that it needs to the graph resources that are described in the template that they're trying to deploy. And that isn't the case today. So we have a few challenges in getting a full fix together for that. So we have some questions around what kind of clients you use today for your deployments when operating with a signed-in user. So either maybe you're just only using Microsoft clients like Azure PowerShell or Azure CLI, or maybe the portal, or maybe you use other clients, your own or third-party clients, maybe together with Azure PowerShell or Azure CLI, but you are using other clients outside of Azure PowerShell and Azure CLI. Or maybe you just don't do interactive deployments. Maybe you only do app-only deployments. So please go ahead and answer with the thing that is closest to what you do. Next slide, thank you. Okay, I'll give folks a little bit of time here. So today, these are the graph bicep types that we support in private preview. We're about to add federated identity credentials soon to that list. But we'd love to know on the team what other bicep types you need for your deployment scenarios. And if you can enter a list of up to 5 stack ranked types, that would be great. I'll give you a minute or two to go ahead and do that. Okay, folks. Hopefully you've managed to add a few things there. Let's move on to the last question. Thank you, Stephanie. As I indicated before, we don't support application or client secrets today. The only thing we support are certificates. We are about to add support for federated identity credentials, and more on the plan very shortly. But there's a new capability that is being worked on that hopefully will be out soon as a public preview, where you can use a managed identity as the credential for your federated identity credentials. What this means is that within Bicep, you can just create a managed identity and then reference it as part of your federated identity credential resource as part of an application resource. And it really is as simple as that. And now you're able to use that application or any generated service principal from that application to request access tokens to resources. So it follows the normal OAuth flows. So it's very powerful. It's very simple to configure in Bicep. It's more secure because it's passwordless or secretless. So you don't have to store your secrets somewhere as part of your scripting. And also it's much simpler to manage. You don't have to roll secrets or roll certificates if you are using certificates. That's all taken care of you through the managed identity infrastructure. So the question here is, given what I've told you about federated identity credentials using managed identities, would you still need client secrets when you are configuring applications for your APIs? Sorry, for your client apps. So if you answer that one, and you may see a follow-up question there as well. So when you're done with that, feel free to respond on the survey. I can see a whole bunch of answers coming in, and it's updating.
Dan, Phil is asking if this FIC capability is the same or similar to Workload Identity Federation?
Yes, it's the same. It's synonymous with Workload Identity Federation. You would configure Workload Identity Federation through FIC. So yeah, and so hopefully you'll be able to use it with ADO pipelines as well. Okay, well, thanks everyone for those responses. I will figure out a way to disseminate the information maybe in another update, but that's really useful for us. It'll be great feedback for us and help us with our plans. Next slide, please, Stephanie, and we can wrap this up. Okay, so we're going to have some new features along the way until we get to what we plan as our public preview in May, and we'll roll those new features out into private preview. The first of which will be reconciling the naming of client-provided keys in Bicep with what they're called in graph types, and hopefully this will make the use of existing much simpler as well. We hope to roll that out in the middle of this month. Next up, we hope to have the federated identity credentials. That will be available. The API shape is exactly the same, whether you're federating with different identity providers or whether you're using a managed identity as a credential. So both those capabilities will be available in March, assuming that the other feature to use a managed identity as a credential is available as well. We'll expose V1 resource types. So today we only have beta resource types, so that'll come out in March as well. Zero touch deployment, so app only. We were hoping to have that earlier. We discovered a few challenges, so that's now coming at the beginning of April. That was a painful one for us because we know how important that particular capability is, and we are eager to get that out as quickly as we can. And then we're working on the documentation so that we have things like graph bicep reference, like a template reference that folks would likely be familiar with. Stephanie, if you can do one more click here, please. So just to be clear, things that are not part of public preview plan, at least at this point in time, and I'm sure many of these things are painful for a number of folks, so apologies for that. But yeah, I can see there's questions around some of these features. So and that's all I have for today. Thank you again for your participation. I will try and answer the questions in the chat and as they come along after this, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate it. If anyone has any questions or anything else they want to add, you can raise your hand and maybe ask directly. Otherwise, we can move forward. Alex, do you want to share the screen or do you want me to scroll through?
I'll let you scroll through if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
So we just had a quick kind of usability question on the CLI schema for deployment stacks. We've gotten some feedback that how we deal with it's called the action on unmanaged property is a little bit confusing. So we're proposing this other option and trying to get your thoughts on it. So there's 3 different flags that I'll walk through, and I'll just go one at a time. So Stephanie, if you can go one click forward. So the leftmost column is essentially what is the behavior when a resource becomes unmanaged. So if it was in a stack in the first deployment of the stack, but in the second deployment of the stack, you remove that resource. You might have commented it out or deleted it or what have you. So the question is what to do in that case, and how do you express that? So the first case is you can say, I want to delete it if it's a resource, but I want to detach it if it's a resource group or management group, what we would sometimes call a scope. The actual API setting is the second column. So you can see the property is called action on unmanaged. And then it has 3 settings here, one for management groups, one for resource groups, and one for resources, because we say we only want to delete resources in the case of an unmanaged entity. The management group setting is detached, the resource group setting is detached, but the resource setting is set to delete. And then how you actually express this in Azure CLI, and it's similar for Azure PowerShell. I just realized, I apologize, I flipped these. The right column is the current, the left column is the proposed. So I'll clarify that in chat as well. Right now, you don't specify the property name, you just say -- delete resources in this case. And it was hard for some users to understand what this was actually referencing. So the proposed alternative is to have the command or the flag be -- action on unmanaged, and then you can say delete resources. Stephanie, if we go one click forward, we can show the next setting. This is if you want to delete everything, if you want to delete resources and scopes. So the only difference here is that the API setting is delete for all 3 properties: delete management groups, delete resource groups, delete resources. The current behavior is just -- delete all, and the new or proposed behavior is action on unmanaged, delete all. And then the third case is if you want to detach everything. If you can go one click forward, Stephanie. Which just says, I don't want you to delete any resources, but I don't want to manage them anymore. So in that case, the setting is detach for all three properties. Today you would do dash dash detach all, and then the proposed is to say dash dash action on unmanaged detach all. So really, I'm just looking to get some feedback on which is the preferred option. I will type out the options here and we can vote on them quickly. Option 1, and manage, and CLI option 2, which is no property name, only value. So if you prefer the second option where you don't have to say action on unmanaged each time, just go ahead and vote for that one. Taylor, to your question about deleting RGs and resources, but not MGs, we can add that if it's needed. We're trying to keep the options simpler for now to just say, do you want to delete resources and detach scopes? And if you need to separate it to say delete resource groups but not management groups, we can introduce those settings. But our suspicion is that in 90% of cases or more, you'll only want to be selecting between resources and scopes. So that's why it's limited for now. Phil, will the current options still work, or will we need to update to the newer version when if updated? It will be a breaking change if we make the change. So the next slide, which I'm about to cover, is going to talk about the GA plan for Stacks. We would like to try to make this change before we GA, since it will be a breaking change. So good question. And Anton, isn't delete all already used? It is. I screwed up the slide. The right column should say current, not the left column. So that's my mistake. Richard, I don't like the first name delete resources because resource groups are resources. I can appreciate that concern. That's fair feedback. Option to include a setting for resource groups seems to be desirable. So Eric, is that you want an option to delete resource groups but not delete management groups? Got it. Yeah, we can put a GitHub issue up there to try to collect some feedback on how many people need that. And then the GitHub issue link is on this slide. I'll also put it in the chat. So if you want to share any additional feedback or context, let me put that link here. And it looks like there's no other major questions and got plenty of votes. So I think that's all we need to cover on this slide. Thanks, everybody. The next slide is just to talk about kind of deployment stacks overall. By the way, normally Angel would be giving this update, but he is in Japan right now, having a great time on a vacation. So that's why I'm covering for him. The tentative ETA for Stacks GA is sometime in March. There aren't very major changes to how things work. If you're using the public preview today, the biggest introduction, and I suspect a lot of people may not have even noticed that this was missing, is that the pre-flight API was not fully implemented in Stacks. So the kind of canonical cases with a storage account, if you're deploying a storage account with a bad name value, we're able to check that in advance service side. We can do that with deployments. That doesn't work today with Stacks. When we GA, you'll have pre-flight parity, so your validation experience will be the same between deployments and deployment stacks. Otherwise, the features really are basically the same. The question really for the group is, based on your Stacks experience up to this point, does it seem appropriate to GA Stacks, or are there any major blocking features missing? There are definitely some features missing, and I'll highlight some of those in a second, but I wanted to get some feedback from the group before I I display all of those and invite that criticism, I guess. Prasant, you had a question?
Yeah, when you're talking about preprime validation for naming, does it also touch on the subject of that we add assertion? I was wondering if you can use assertion in the pipeline and validate the name.
Meaning the assertion capability in the experimental testing framework, or assertion just kind of as a general concept to add to deployments?
Yeah, and I saw that assertion being used in I think a couple of Bicep community call, I got 2 months back, where it was used by calling assertion file separately and validating the name is correct. But when I posted on, if it's possible to use in a GitHub flow, so that the name of the storage account that I'm creating kind of matches my naming convention, for company naming convention, and it would be like more like a validation. Okay, if this is not matching, then it should not go to the second workflow.
Makes sense. So this pre-flight capability is independent of that assertion framework. And the assertion framework is still very much experimental. If and when it does ever get released out of experimental, our goal would be to do that, to check the assertions as early as possible in the deployment lifecycle. So if it is possible to evaluate it before the deployment starts, we'll try to do that. And otherwise, we'll wait for the necessary resources to be deployed to evaluate the assertions. So we'll kind of construct the same execution graph so that we know which resources need to be deployed first before we can check, outputs or assertions or what have you. We'll have that same logic for the test framework.
But it's in the roadmap, right? To integrate
the assertion framework to get out of experimental is unscheduled at this point. So in the interest of transparency, not that this is necessarily new information, that was our intern project over the summer, to kind of test out what users might want from testing. We haven't been able to spend enough time to figure out what is necessary to take it out of experimental. There's some more design work to be done there, and probably some user research as well. So no commitment on when that's going to leave experimental at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Just reading through the chat. I've seen issues where it fails to delete the stack, but it works if I delete the resources first and then loop back to nuke the empty stack. Failures around underlying resource provider deletes. Yeah, makes sense. A lot of these cases where something is failing to delete, if you can share, Anton, just like you suggested, a GitHub issue with the exact reproduction, we can definitely take a closer look. This is one of those things that we're at the mercy of the resource provider to be doing, quote unquote, the right thing. And with Stacks, we may be exposing cases where that's not happening today. And we'll do our best to enforce the ARM resource provider contract, but we can't guarantee any particular changes. So we will, I think our commitment is to try to make the Stacks experience as good as possible in those cases. So if deleting the stack is not working because of underlying resources, maybe there's a way to kind of nuke the stack without deleting in the ideal way. There may be some things that we introduce there, but that won't be for GA. So if you think that that's a blocking issue for GA, that's definitely something that we'd be interested in understanding. I'll just finish scrolling through the chat here. Okay, so no other major concerns is what I'm seeing. We can go to the next section, Stephanie. These are, in my opinion, the big missing features right now. So what if is not integrated into the stack command, so you can still get what if results with all the caveats that comes with what if by doing a regular deployment what if. The results are essentially what you would see if we had a stack what if command, or at least a basic stack what if command. So that's not there. Deny assignments for management group scope stacks. So if you're trying to add deny assignments to like policies at a management group, for example, we don't support adding deny assignments in that context. And then the third one is there's no cancel API for stacks. That's something that we have in deployments. If your deployment gets stuck or something like that, we've seen a few cases, limited cases, where stacks kind of failed to terminate. So that's where cancel API would be helpful, but that's not something we'll have for GA. So those are the big ones. If you do feel that any of these are blocking adoption of stacks, we definitely would be interested in understanding that. Otherwise, these will be kind of known limitations when we go GA in March. So you can share thoughts here in the chat. You can share thoughts in the Deployment Stacks GitHub repo, or you can reach out to us directly, but wanted to give you all that update of what's coming. That's it for me, Stephanie. Thank you.
Cool. Those are all the topics that we have for today, and we have 10 more minutes, so we could take this time for a Q&A. If anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand and we could answer you directly. Any update on the Helm provider coming to Bicep? We have heard you. We have heard people wanting the Helm provider extensibility, but unfortunately, we don't have that in plan at all. But we can definitely put it on our prioritization list. Updates on the experimental testing framework. I think Alex, you could probably answer that a little better than I can.
Sure. Yeah. No major updates. So it's the same as it was when we first showed it over the summer. It was our intern project over the summer, and there's definitely still some open questions on how that testing framework needs to work end to end. So as of now, there's no plan to take that out of experimental, but it's something that we do want to continue to explore. So as we get into our next semester of work planning, we'll have the conversation of if we can spend some time on the testing framework.
There's also the question on any plans to make it possible or provide documentation for building custom extensibility providers for Bicep. We have talked about this, but it is a lot to maintain, so we don't know if we want to prioritize it just yet. Alex or Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's definitely correct. I think it's similar to the testing framework where as we get into next semester planning, I think we'll want to take a fresh look if there's anything we can do there that's not terribly expensive.
Dan, it looks like you have an update to the responses in the survey. It would be great if you could share them in the call as well, because the recording won't be able to share chat.
Oh, okay, sure. I can do it.
Sorry,
verbally.
don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. So based on what I can see from the survey, and thank you everyone for responding, most folks are happy with the current set of supported entry types. For those who wanted more, the ones we saw were around users, both types of privileged identity management, identity governance APIs, role management, conditional access policy, and admin units. Those were the most popular. Folks also seemed pretty enthusiastic about federated identity credentials and going passwordless, but secrets are still needed for legacy apps that a number of folks still have to support, because some of those are third-party apps. And then most folks do use Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell. Some do app only, so that's not an issue. Only 2 folks used other interactive clients, and I saw there was a question about there wasn't an option for both MS clients and app-based deployments, and they would have picked that one. I guess the fact that it was more around whether one of the things we may do is we have this challenge with user on behalf of Flow, and until we get a full fix, one of the things we were looking at was if the predominant usage for interactive deployments uses Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell, we could open up the Flow in public preview to support just those 2 clients, and maybe Azure Portal. So that was kind of more of the reasoning behind the question. So that's orthogonal from application only.
Okay, cool. Is that it on the updates from the survey?
Yeah.
Great. That's good. I think we have a couple more questions. Any update on IntelliSense for Bicep registry modules? I think, Stephen, you can answer that.
Yeah, we are planning on starting to roll those out as soon as this release is done.
Sounds good. There was another question. I will just say it in the call for those who are watching later. Any plans or roadmap for Microsoft Copilot for Bicep on Azure? And our PM, Sydney Karimi, had said we are currently investigating the scenarios for a Bicep Copilot. Hopefully we'll have an update for you in the coming month, which is pretty exciting, working on that.
By the way,
yeah.
on that, sorry, Stephanie, on that one, Bill had mentioned GitHub Copilot. I think one thing we'd love to better understand is what are the expectations beyond what GitHub Copilot is doing today. I see Stan is commenting on this as well. Does not work well with Bicep types, does not generate markdown docs based on types. So I think what we maybe want to better understand is, like, is GitHub Copilot the right place for Copilot experiences in Bicep, or like a separate extension, or do we just need better support in GitHub Copilot for Bicep somehow, which we need to understand what options we have for improving this. And we don't necessarily need answers right now, but I think that's part of what we're looking to understand. Not everyone is in the GitHub world. So, Chris, your concern is the fact that it's the GitHub Copilot.
Yep. Absolutely. We have clients that are still ASDO. We have clients that are Bitbucket.
Does GitHub Copilot require a GitHub account? I genuinely don't know the answer to that question.
I believe it does.
Okay. Interesting.
And I think there's weirdness. There's all weirdness in GitHub about the enterprise.
I've actually looked through this. It doesn't actually require a GitHub repo license, but it does require a license within GitHub. So you do have to have a registered GitHub account,
correct,
even if you don't use GitHub.
And if you're coming from a corporation, you probably need a GitHub Enterprise enabled account, which again gets into the whole licensing craziness.
It works with GitHub Teams as well, standard, and it works with GitHub Personal, but it works with GitHub Teams to get a free version as well, as long as you pay the Copilot subscription.
Right, but if we're talking about coming from a corporation that is not currently a GitHub Enterprise corporation, typically you'd want your development team to not use your GitHub personal accounts for that. And this is where we get into this whole discussion on how GitHub Enterprise licenses work and all that stuff. But it's confusing enough that we've had clients that are saying, we're not going down the GitHub path until the licensing is all figured out.
You can have a GitHub organization. It doesn't have to be GitHub Enterprise.
Everybody just
sign your licenses that way.
Just quick note, more or less we are using the GitHub. We have the GitHub, we have also the IDO and other, and more or less we are mixing the, on the GitHub account, we are using also the private email and company emails because you have option to combine them to one account. And depending from the organization, you can have, you can buy just the Copilot license, yes? So more or less you don't even need to have the GitHub Enterprise account, yes?
Yeah.
But you understand the
users
complexity.
into your organization and assign
I'm gonna
license.
table the conversation. I think understanding that there are licensing complexities and that's what's factoring into that makes a lot of sense. So we'll take that into account as we start thinking about what we can do with copilots.
I would suggest just as a to go to maybe the Copilot team, yes, to the Copilot product group, meaning more or less that maybe we are looking for something like the trained dedicated model for supporting the Bicep language, and that it will be probably the best support, yes, meaning more or less that the existing model language will be trained on the Bicep libraries, language, semantic, and all that, and modules, and this would be fully, let's say, supported by the Copilot. So if somebody will, I don't know, start VS Code, the Copilot will detect that this is the Bicep, and they will have the first, let's say, level support.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think we want, ideally, we're building one code base of logic for Bicep Copilot stuff, which I'm putting up in air quotes because I don't think we really understand what that stuff involves. And then we can kind of plug it into whatever Copilot experiences we want to light up for Bicep. So if you have the licensing and you want to do it in GitHub Copilot, you should have a good experience there. If we need to light it up somewhere else because of those licensing issues, we can definitely discuss that as well. Stephanie, any questions that we missed?
I don't think so. I know there's one on OCI registries. I don't know if Marcin, you could give a quick update.
Sorry, what's the question?
Any update on OCI registries?
We are still investigating because the blocker for us on this one is basically lack of a good OCI capable client for .NET. There's been some progress on the ORAS side. If you're familiar with the ORAS CLI, the ORAS team has bootstrapped the .NET SDK effort, so we'll have to investigate and see, but no meaningful updates or ETAs at this time. But I would say that there's some hope now.
Okay, great. Hopefully that answered your question. Yeah, I think that's it. Great. Thanks everyone for coming to our first call of the year. And we will see you all next month. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, see you, everyone.